No one was ever supposed to discover this. It stayed hidden beneath 2 centuries of dust and deliberate silence, a tale so toxic even the earth seemed unwilling to hold it. On the morning of August 12, 1843, a shriek cut through the thick air of Willowbrook Plantation. A cry so raw, in its anguish it stunned the birds into silence among the ancient oaks. Yet it was not that scream which decided the destiny of an entire county. It was the hush that followed. It was the cold, measured, and unnervingly composed mind of the woman who had just glimpsed the truth. A truth concealed for over 200 years, until now. How could a story like this, a punishment so monstrous it became folklore, simply disappear from memory? What were we never meant to uncover in those locked courthouse files? The answer is far grimmer than any gossip. It starts not with treachery, but with the stark realization that the most dangerous force in existence is a woman with absolutely nothing to lose. Before that dawn, Catherine Harrove was the image of Southern grace. She ruled over 3,000 acres of prime South Carolina land, a mansion with pillars white as bone, and a husband, Edmund, who seemed the ideal gentleman planter. He was tall, admired, a deacon at the church, a man whose existence rested on order, tradition, and the quiet, tireless toil of the enslaved. But Catherine's existence was a gilded prison, and its bars were made of whispers. 6 years of marriage and no children. In the drawing rooms of Beaufort, this was her sole-defining trait. A fruitless wife, a disappointment. She caught it in the pitying stares of other women, felt it in the cold distance of her husband's bed. Edmund was a dutiful, if distant, partner. He carried out his role with the same careful efficiency he applied to his account books. He was a pillar of society, yet in the quiet moments, in the gaps between heartbeats late at night, Catherine sensed an emptiness in her home, a hollowness in her husband's gaze. It was a secret he kept hidden, and she, wrapped in her own careful denial, had persuaded herself it was a secret that didn't matter. But secrets, like decay, have a way of spreading. They taint the air. They alter the taste of the water. And Catherine, a woman trained to perceive every faint shift in her household, had started to notice the small, jarring notes in the harmony of plantation life. She couldn't name it yet, but she could sense it. A darkness lurking just beyond the sun-drenched surface of Willowbrook. That darkness had names: Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. They were not merely property. They were men who moved through Edmund Hargrove's world in a way no one else did. Marcus, his personal valet, was 24, fair-skinned, with a sharpness of mind that was both a blessing and a burden. He foresaw Edmund's wishes before they were voiced, a silent, elegant presence in the main house. Yet his eyes held a knowing, an awareness that marked him apart. He understood the master in ways Catherine never could. Samuel worked in the stables. He was 26, powerful, with hands that could soothe a stallion or fix a broken harness. He possessed a quiet dignity that slavery had failed to crush, and Edmund had shown a peculiar interest in the stables over the last few years, visiting at odd hours, long after the day's labor had ended. Then there was Daniel, the young carpenter, barely 21. He was slight, almost delicate, with an artisan's hands. He was the most silent of the three, a man who had learned that survival meant staying unseen. But Edmund noticed him. He noticed all of them. For 3 years, Edmund had nurtured a hidden life in the east wing of the mansion. The wing was officially closed for renovations that never seemed to finish. It had its own entrance, concealed by overgrown jasmine vines. Inside, he had furnished a room, not opulently, but with a comfort and attention that hinted at permanence. A large bed with linens Catherine had observed missing from the household inventory, heavy drapes that shut out the judgmental glow of the moon, and a lock, a heavy iron lock, on the inside. This was his refuge, his only true home. Here, beneath the soft glow of oil lamps, the exhausting performance of being Edmund Harrove, Plantation master, could finally drop. Here he was someone else. But what occurs when a sanctuary is erected on a foundation of absolute dominance? These men had no alternative. Can you picture that? To be called by the man who owns your flesh, your time, your very existence, and to understand that refusal is unthinkable. Refusal meant the lash. It meant the auction block. It meant being sold away from the only kin you had. So they submitted. They answered when summoned. They guarded the secret. And in exchange, they received small favors, better rations, lighter duties, protection from the everyday cruelty of the fields. It was a pact with the devil, a tangled web of force, survival, and something else. Something Catherine was about to witness with her own eyes. A whispered rumor from that era, spoken only by the enslaved and never by the masters, claimed that the devil didn't reside in hell, but in the gap between a man's public face and his private cravings. For Catherine, that gap had widened into a canyon. The small inconsistencies had begun to accumulate, forming a pattern she could no longer overlook. Edmund, suddenly energized and almost buoyant after weeks of his usual brooding distance. Marcus, steering clear of her gaze in the hallway, his frame taut with a tension she couldn't name. Daniel, with a faint bruise shaped like fingers on his neck that he attempted to hide with his collar. She had dismissed it all. Of course, to even entertain the alternative was to court madness. It was unthinkable, unnatural, a sin so grave it was scarcely spoken of. The world of a Southern gentleman contained no such filth. Her mind, schooled in the polite arts of watercolor and French, refused to form the words. But her heart, famished for 6 years and bruised by the quiet censure of her equals, sensed something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The carefully maintained denial was fracturing. The lie she inhabited had grown too thin to endure. The night of August 11th, 1843 was dense and starless. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia and rot, a smell she would forever connect with the death of her world. Tonight she would not lie in her bed listening to the house settle. Tonight she would not feign. She had made a choice. She would uncover the truth, whatever it was. She would trace the shadow to its origin. She would see with her own eyes the thing that had taken her husband, her future, and her identity. She had no notion that what she was about to discover was not merely the end of her marriage, but the start of a retribution so absolute it would become a ghost story murmured across generations. She was no longer just a wife. She was becoming a huntress, and the quarry was the truth. Whatever the price, she would drag it into the open. She waited. She lay in her bed, fully dressed beneath the covers, her body a tense line of expectancy. The house groaned around her, every creak of the floorboards a ticking clock. At last, she heard it. The soft tread of Edmund's boots in the hallway, moving not toward her room, but toward the servants' stairs. He was attempting silence, but in a house that held its breath, every noise was magnified. She gave him 10 minutes, an age, long enough for him to feel secure, to shed the skin of Edmund Harrove and become whoever he was in that concealed room. Then she rose, a dark shawl over her white nightgown, a specter moving through her own home. Her bare feet made no sound on the cool heart, pine floors. The garden was a maze of shadows, the quarter moon offering just enough light to see the path. The air vibrated with the drone of cicadas, a sound like 1,000 tiny frayed nerves. Her own heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, so loud she was certain it would rouse the dead. She reached the east wing, the air abruptly cooler there. The side door, the one hidden by the jasmine, was ajar. A sliver of warm, flickering light escaped, painting a shifting golden line on the damp earth. She crept nearer, her breath catching in her throat, her hands trembling so fiercely she had to press them against the cold brick of the wall. She peered through the gap, and the world shifted. The room was exactly as she had never pictured, comfortable, inhabited. The bed dominated the space, its fine linens a stark white against the dark wood. And on that bed was her husband, Edmund, unclothed, his body a pale sculpture in the lamplight. But he was not alone. He was entwined with the three others, Marcus, Samuel, Daniel. The scene was not violent. It was not forced. What shattered Catherine to her very core was the intimacy, the casual, practiced way they moved together. She saw Edmund kiss Marcus with a tenderness he had never, not once, shown her. She watched Samuel's strong hands trace the line of Edmund's back with a familiarity that spoke of countless nights just like this one. She heard Daniel whisper something in Edmund's ear, and Edmund laughed. A real unguarded, joyful laugh. It was a sound she had not heard in years. In that single eternal moment, Catherine understood. It was not just the act. It was not merely the betrayal. It was that he was happy. He had discovered his joy, his truth, his connection, and it had nothing to do with her. She was the lie, their marriage, her life. Her entire existence at Willowbrook was a carefully constructed fiction to conceal this. This truth, something inside her did not just break. It froze. It transformed from wounded flesh into something sharp, crystalline, and cold. The scream that had risen in her throat died, replaced by a silence so deep it felt as though the entire world had gone deaf. The shock, the humiliation, the raw, searing betrayal, it was all there. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking shape. A rage so pure and focused it was almost serene. For 6 years, she had performed her part. The perfect wife, the barren wife. She had borne the pity, the censure, the slow erosion of her own value. She had blamed herself, her body, her own inadequacies. And all the while he had been living this other life. This real life, in this hidden room with these men, these slaves. The thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. In 1843, South Carolina, what she was witnessing was not just a sin. It was a crime punishable by death, not only for Edmund, but for the 3 men with him. The law, in its brutal simplicity, called it sodomy, an abomination, a capital offense. The law made no distinction for a man of property. It offered no mercy. And in that frozen, terrible moment, watching her husband's secret happiness, Catherine Harrove saw her path. It was not a path of grief or reconciliation. It was a path of utter biblical destruction. She backed away from the door, her movements now precise, deliberate. She drifted back through the garden, the cicadas now sounding like a chorus of furies. She did not return to her bed. She went to her writing desk. Her hands, which had been trembling moments before, were now perfectly steady. She lit a single candle, its flame barely flickering in the still air. She drew out her finest stationery, the paper reserved for important correspondence. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Purpose. She began to write. 3 letters, one to Edmund's mother, the matriarch whose disappointment had haunted Catherine for years. One to Sheriff Charles Dunwee, a man who valued order and the law above all else. And one last letter, the shortest of the 3, to Edmund himself. In each, she described what she had seen. She spared no detail. She used words as weapons, crafting a portrait of depravity so vivid, so undeniable that no one who read it could ever see Edmund Hargrove as anything other than a monster. She sealed each letter with wax, pressing her family's signet into it with a final definitive thud. She walked to Edmund's bedroom and slid his letter under the door. Then she returned to her own room, lay on top of the covers, still in her shawl and nightgown, and waited for the sun to rise. She was no longer Catherine Harrove, the wronged wife. She was an angel of vengeance, and the dawn was coming to watch her work. A man's reputation is the property of others. His character is his own. This quote, attributed to a Charleston philosopher of the era, was the unspoken creed of Edmund's world. Your character could be anything, as long as your reputation stayed immaculate. Edmund found the letter as the first gray light of dawn bled through his window. It was lying on the floor, a crisp white rectangle against the dark wood, the red wax seal like a drop of blood. He broke it. He read the words, and the blood drained from his own face. The paper shook in his hand. He read it again, and then a third time, a desperate, senseless hope that the words might change, rearrange themselves into something less devastating. She knows, the thought was a death knell. She saw everything, and she has already written to the sheriff, to my mother. His mind fractured into 1,000 panicked thoughts. Run. He could saddle a horse, ride north, vanish. But to where? His entire identity was woven into the soil of Willowbrook. He was the land, the house, the name. Without them, he was a ghost. Deny it. He could try to convince her she was mistaken, that she'd had a nightmare. But her letter, it contained details, the sound of his laugh, the specific linens on the bed, the way Daniel whispered in his ear, details that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that she had been there, that she had watched. Rage came next, a hot, useless flash. How dare she? How dare she threaten to detonate the world he had so carefully constructed? But the rage sputtered and died, because beneath it was the cold, hard bedrock of truth. He was guilty. He had lived a lie. And in the rigid, unforgiving universe of the antebellum South, there was no forgiveness for a sin like his. He walked to Catherine's door. He knocked, his knuckles rapping softly against the wood. No answer. He tried the handle locked. Catherine, he called, his voice a ragged whisper. We must talk, please. Her voice came from the other side, and it was a voice he no longer recognized. It was calm, clear, and as cold as river stone. There is nothing to discuss, Edmund. The letters were sent by a trusted hand an hour ago. Sheriff Dunwee will be here soon. Your mother shortly after. I suggest you use what little time you have left to make your peace with God, because you will find no peace in this world. He pressed his forehead against the unyielding wood of the door, the final barrier between his old life and the abyss. Please, Catherine, I can explain. Her laugh was not a sound of mirth. It was the sound of breaking glass. Explain. Explain how you have spent 3 years defiling yourself, our home, and your name. Explain how you have made a mockery of our marriage vows. There is no explanation that matters anymore, Edmund. There is only the truth. You are a sodomite. That is what you are. That is all you are. And by sunset, everyone will know. Sheriff Charles Dunwee arrived at precisely 7:30, just as the morning mist was burning off the fields. He came with 2 deputies, their faces grim, their presence an immediate and ugly stain on the manicured beauty of Willowbrook. The sheriff was a man carved from oak, 60 years old, with eyes that had seen everything the low country could offer up in terms of human wickedness. He had known Edmund since he was a boy. He had attended the Harrove wedding, toasted their future, and eaten at their Christmas table. He was part of the fabric of their lives. Catherine met them at the door. She was still in her night clothes, a dark shawl wrapped around her. But she projected an aura of absolute control. She invited them into the grand foyer, offered them coffee as if they were social callers, and then, in a calm, measured tone, she explained the situation. She laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon, her voice never wavering. She handed him her written, signed account of what she had witnessed. As Dunwee read, his face already stern, hardened into a mask of granite. This was not just a crime. It was a betrayal of the highest order. It was a crack in the foundation of their world. A world where white masters were meant to be unimpeachable, their authority absolute, their desires proper. "These are the most serious charges a man can face in this state, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am aware, Sheriff," Catherine replied, her gaze unwavering. "That is why I sent for you. My husband is in his study. The 3 slaves he was with are in their quarters. I want them all arrested. I want this handled with the full and complete power of the law." The sheriff nodded slowly, the gears of justice, brutal and inexorable, beginning to turn. "Show me where this occurred." She led them through the silent house, a procession to a tomb. She showed them the east wing, the hidden side door, the room itself. The air inside was still heavy with the scent of oil lamps and sweat. The bed was a tangled mess of sheets, the evidence of the previous night's intimacy impossible to deny. Dunwee's jaw tightened. This act committed here in this house by one of their own. It was a cancer, and it had to be cut out, publicly, completely. "Arrest Mr. Hargrove," he said to his deputies, his voice flat. "Take him to the town jail, then go to the quarters. Arrest Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. Chain them." The deputies moved toward the study. Edmund did not resist. He was sitting in a leather chair, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He stood when they entered, his face a blank canvas of shock, and held out his wrists for the shackles. As they led him through the foyer, he saw Catherine. He stopped, his eyes locking with hers. "I hope you understand what you have done," he said, his voice barely audible. "This will destroy you just as surely as it destroys me." Catherine allowed herself a small, terrible smile. It did not reach her eyes. "I know exactly what I have done, Edmund. I have revealed you. I will survive this. I will be the wronged wife, the tragic victim of your monstrous depravity. My family in Charleston will welcome me home. But you will be nothing. A name people whisper in disgust, a cautionary tale told to frighten children. You will be erased." He said nothing more. The deputies pulled him toward the door, out into the morning sun, and into a world that no longer saw him as a man, but as a contagion. The arrests in the slave quarters happened differently. There was no pretense of civility, no quiet surrender. The deputies stormed in, their presence an immediate explosion of violence in the fragile morning calm. They dragged Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel from their cabins, their families watching in silent, terrified confusion. Chains were clamped onto their wrists and ankles, the cold iron of brutal finality. Their mothers wept, their wives and children stared, their minds unable to process what was happening. Why were they being taken? What had they done? They knew, of course, that their loved ones were caught in the master's web, but they could never have imagined the nature of this particular transgression. This was something beyond their experience, a crime of the master's world that would now be paid for with their bodies. In the eyes of the law, they were not men who had been coerced by their owner. They were active participants, seducers, corrupters. Their guilt was a foregone conclusion. If a white woman accused them, their fate was sealed. By noon, all 4 men were locked in separate cells in the Beaufort town jail. By evening, the entire county knew. The news did not just spread, it detonated. It was a wildfire of whispers, of horrified speculation in shops, parlors, and taverns. Edmund Hargrove, a sodomite, caught with 3 of his own male slaves by his wife. The scandal was so immense, so profoundly shocking that it eclipsed everything else. It was a tear in the fabric of reality. People were drawn to it, repulsed by it, but utterly unable to look away. It tapped into the deepest, most volatile fears of their society, fears of sexual deviance, racial impurity, and the terrifying possibility that the masters who ruled their world were not the gods they pretended to be. The week that followed was a strange, suspended hell. The whole of Beaufort seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. The air was thick with judgment and a kind of morbid, feverish excitement. They had seen murder trials, thefts, all the usual sins of man. But this was different. This felt biblical. A cleansing was coming. A spectacle was required, and everyone in their heart of hearts knew it would end in blood. It was just a question of how much and whose. If you have come this far, you are beginning to understand that this is not just a story about revenge. It is about power and about how an entire society can be weaponized. Comment, the truth bleeds through. Below if you are ready for what comes next. Judge Howard Middleton was 68 years old, a veteran of the War of 1812, and a man who saw the law not as a tool for justice, but as a dike holding back the floodwaters of chaos. He believed in order. He believed in hierarchy. When the documents detailing the charges against Edmund Hargrove landed on his desk, he sat in his chambers for over an hour, reading and rereading them. He had known Edmund his whole life. He had signed the marriage license. He had admired the Greek Revival mansion at Willowbrook, and now he was being asked to preside over the man's complete and utter demolition. The law was brutally clear. The South Carolina statutes defined sodomy as the abominable and detestable crime against nature, and the prescribed punishment was death. There was no ambiguity, but Judge Middleton knew it was not that simple. Edmund was not just any man. He was white. He was wealthy. He was a Hargrove. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel, however, were property. Legally, they were worth about $800 each. In theory, the law applied equally to all four. In practice, everyone in that town knew the scales were weighted. The enslaved men would be disposed of quickly and mercilessly. The real question, the one that could threaten the stability of the entire county, was what to do with Edmund Hargrove. To execute one of their own for this crime, it would set a dangerous precedent. It would suggest that the private lives of powerful white men were subject to scrutiny, that their secrets could have fatal consequences. It was a truth that the other wealthy planters in the county could not afford to have established. On August 15th, the judge called a secret meeting. The sheriff was there, the county prosecutor, the mayor, 2 church deacons, the architects of Beaufort society. Catherine was not invited. No one was there to speak for Edmund. Gentlemen, the judge began, his voice grave, we face a situation of the utmost delicacy. The evidence against Mr. Hargrove is unfortunately unimpeachable. His wife is the witness. The physical evidence corroborates her testimony. If this were a poor farmer, we would proceed to conviction and hanging without a second thought. Mayor Thomas Pritchard, a portly man whose fortune was also built on slave labor, shifted uncomfortably. But it is Edmund Hargrove. His family helped found this county. A public execution. The scandal would tarnish us all. It suggests a rottenness in our own class. The prosecutor, a thin, severe man named Richard Fellows, disagreed. With respect, Mayor, that is precisely why we must be severe. If we are seen to protect our own, we undermine the very law that grants us our authority. The common man must see that justice is blind. A third voice, that of Reverend Samuel Cartwright, cut through the debate. This is not a legal matter alone. It is a spiritual crisis. What Mr. Hargrove has done is an abomination in the eyes of God. It is a corruption of the natural order. To show mercy would be to condone the sin. We must make an example of him. A terrifying example. Judge Middleton listened, letting them argue, letting the fear and self-interest in the room curdle the air. He had already decided on a course of action, one that would satisfy the public's thirst for blood, while preserving the unspoken rule that men like Edmund were different. He raised a hand and the room fell silent. "Hear me out," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial calm. Execution would be a mercy, a quick drop, a snapped neck, a private burial. His family could mourn the man he was supposed to be, and the story would end. No, what I propose is far worse than death. The men leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. We will hold a public trial, the judge continued. Conviction is a certainty, but in sentencing, I will use my discretion. I will sentence Mr. Hargrove not to death, but to a public punishment of such prolonged and exquisite cruelty that by the end of it, he will beg for the gallows we denied him. We will destroy not just his body, but his name, his soul, his very identity as a man. We will make him a living ghost, a cautionary tale so horrifying that no man in this state will ever forget it. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. What form would this punishment take? The judge's expression was cold, devoid of any emotion. The pillory and the whipping post. In the center of the town square, for 3 full days, from dawn until dusk, he will be locked in the stocks, exposed to the sun, the insects, and the contempt of every man, woman, and child in this county. And at noon, on each of those 3 days, he will receive a public whipping. Not enough to kill him, just enough to scar him for life, to ensure that he carries the mark of his shame on his back until the day he dies. The room was silent. Even the most zealous of them seemed taken aback by the sheer calculated brutality of the plan. It was medieval. It was theatrical. It was perfect. And the slaves? Reverend Cartwright asked quietly. The judge's face did not change. They will be hanged, he said without a flicker of hesitation. They are property that corrupted their master. They seduced him into this depravity. Their execution will serve as a stark reminder of what happens when the lower orders step out of their place. We will hang them the day before Mr. Hargrove's punishment begins, so he knows what his actions have cost them. Sheriff Dunwee, a man not known for his compassion, actually frowned. That is not just, Your Honor. All accounts suggest Hargrove was the instigator. Those men had no power to refuse him. Justice, Sheriff, is not the primary objective here. Order is. The judge countered coldly. The white citizens of this county need to see the natural hierarchy restored. A white man may fall, but he falls from a great height. The slaves who participated in his fall must be removed. It is the only way to cauterize the wound and prevent the sickness from spreading. Slowly, reluctantly, the men in the room nodded their agreement. It was a monstrous solution, but it was a solution that worked. It punished the sinner, terrified the populace, and most importantly, reinforced the brutal architecture of their world. A chilling historical fact: in many slave-owning societies, the law stipulated that the testimony of an enslaved person was inadmissible against a white person, unless it was a confession extracted under torture. Their voice was only valid when it confirmed their own guilt. The judge and the town elders had designed their perfect, brutal pageant. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had forgotten about Catherine Hargrove. They assumed she was a broken woman, a grieving wife who would retreat to the shadows and let the men handle the ugly business of justice. They had no idea they had created a monster. She was not in the room, but she had ears everywhere. One of the judge's clerks was courting her cousin. A careless word spoken over dinner, repeated in a letter, and the entire plan was laid bare before her, and she was not satisfied. Death for Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel was expected, but her rage, her cold, crystalline rage, was focused entirely on Edmund. The thought of the 3 men being hanged before Edmund's public humiliation began sword her victory. It would allow for a different narrative to take hold. People would whisper that Edmund's great sin was loving these men, that he had been brought low by a tragic, forbidden passion. he would become a martyr in his own story. Catherine would not allow that. She would not allow him one shred of sympathy. He would not be a tragic figure. He would be the author of all of their deaths, and he would be forced to watch the final act. She sent a note to Judge Middleton, requesting a private audience. He agreed, his curiosity piqued. What more could the wronged wife possibly want? She arrived at his chambers 2 days before the trial, dressed in the severe head to toe black of a widow. It was a deliberate theatrical choice. She was mourning the death of her marriage, her future, her name. She sat across from him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but laced with steel. "I have been made aware of your intended sentence for my husband and the 3 slaves involved in his crime." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That was a private discussion, Mrs. Hargrove. In a town this size, Your Honor, very little remains private for long," she replied smoothly. "I am not here to question your authority. I am here to make a suggestion to ensure that justice is not merely done, but seen to be done in its entirety." He leaned back, studying her, a flicker of uneasy admiration in his eyes. "Speak, I request," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "That the punishments occur simultaneously. That Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel are not hanged beforehand. I want them brought to the square each day, forced to witness what becomes of the man who used them. And I want Edmund, locked in the pillory, to be forced to watch their executions on the final day, after his own punishment is complete." The judge stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw past the wronged wife, past the society beauty. He saw the architect of a vengeance so profound it bordered on the sublime. "That is a remarkably cruel request, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Even for a woman in your position." Catherine's face remained a placid mask, but her eyes burned with a cold fire. "My husband showed me no mercy, Your Honor. He showed our marriage no respect. He showed God's law no reverence. Why should I show him any now? Why should he be granted the dignity of suffering alone, where he can cast himself as the victim? Let the entire town see the full picture. Let them see his depravity and its ultimate fatal consequences all in one terrible tableau. Let him watch those men die knowing his hands and his alone placed the nooses around their necks. Let the story be told completely. Let nothing and no one be hidden." She was not asking for justice. She was asking for a symphony of suffering, and she would be its conductor. Judge Middleton was silent for a long moment. He was a man who appreciated the theater of the law, the power of public spectacle. What she proposed was not just punishment. It was a masterpiece of psychological torture. It was a lesson that would be seared into the collective memory of the county for a century. He saw the terrible, brutal logic in it. It completed the circle. It left no room for ambiguity, no space for sympathy. It was perfect. Slowly he nodded. "Your request is granted, Mrs. Hargrove. I will modify the sentence. The trial will proceed as planned. The punishment will begin the following day, and it will be exactly as you have described." Catherine stood, smoothing the black silk of her skirts. She offered the judge a small, chilling smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. True justice should be a complete and honest story, should it not?" She walked out of his chambers, leaving the most powerful man in the county feeling unnerved, as if he had just made a pact with something ancient and merciless. The stage was now set. The actors had their roles, and Catherine Hargrove, the woman they had all underestimated, was ready for the curtain to rise on her magnum opus of destruction. The trial began on August 18, 1843. It was not a legal proceeding. It was a ritual, a public exorcism. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with sweat, perfume, and a palpable, bloodthirsty curiosity. People stood in the aisles, They crammed into the doorways. They climbed on benches outside to peer through the windows. This was the social event of the decade. Edmund was brought in, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He was a ghost of the man he had been a week ago. His fine clothes were stained and rumpled. His face was gaunt. His eyes were hollowed-out pits of despair. He looked like a man who had already been condemned and was simply waiting for his body to catch up. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were brought in separately, also in chains. They were forced to stand in a corner, guarded, a silent testament to the crime. Marcus looked strangely serene, as if he had traveled to a place beyond fear. Samuel's jaw was set like iron, his eyes burning with a silent, impotent rage. Daniel was trembling uncontrollably, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He looked like a frightened child. Judge Middleton took his seat. The gavel fell, and the farce began. The prosecutor laid out the charges, and then Catherine Hargrove was called to the stand. She moved through the silent, parting crowd with a regal grace. She wore a dress of dark, somber gray, her face veiled. She placed a gloved hand on the Bible and swore an oath to God to tell the truth. Then she lifted her veil. Her face was pale, composed, a mask of tragic dignity. In a clear, steady voice that carried to every corner of the crowded room, she described what she had seen. She did not sensationalize. She did not weep. She simply recounted the facts, her tone clinical and precise. But every word was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling what was left of Edmund's life. She described the intimacy, the tenderness, the laughter. She made the courtroom see it, feel it. The men in the jury box shifted uncomfortably. The women fanned themselves, their faces flushed. She was not just describing a crime. She was describing a world they could not comprehend, a world of desire that existed outside their rigid rules. And she was forcing them to look at it, to judge it, to condemn it. When she finished, there was a stunned silence in the courtroom. It felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The prosecutor, a man who understood the power of a simple question, finally spoke. "Mrs. Hargrove," he asked, his voice gentle, "is there any possibility, any chance at all, that you misunderstood what you saw?" Catherine turned her gaze upon him, her eyes clear and direct. "No, sir," she said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "There is no possibility of a misunderstanding. What I witnessed was clear, unmistakable, and practiced. My husband was not confused. He was not coerced. He was participating willingly, enthusiastically in acts that violate every law of God and every decree of civilized man. He was in that room more himself than I have ever seen him be." The defense attorney, a young man named William Crawford, who looked as if he would rather be anywhere else on earth, rose to his feet. He had been assigned the case. No one wanted it. He had the impossible task of defending the indefensible. "Mrs. Hargrove," he stammered, "is it not possible that your husband was suffering from some temporary insanity? That he was not in his right mind?" Catherine's expression hardened. A flicker of her true cold fury showed for just a second. "Mr. Crawford, my husband maintained this secret life for at least 3 years. That is not insanity. That is a commitment. That is a choice. That is a reflection of his true character." Crawford asked a few more useless questions before slumping back into his chair, utterly defeated. There was no defense. The witness was the victim, and she was unimpeachable. The evidence was her word, and her word was law. Edmund was asked if he wished to testify in his own defense. He slowly shook his head. What could he say? The truth was her version. He had been happy, and that happiness had just condemned him and 3 other men to hell. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were not asked to speak. They were not allowed a voice. They were evidence. They were props in a play written and directed by their betters. They simply stood in the corner, their presence a silent confirmation of guilt, waiting for the inevitable verdict to fall upon them like an axe. The judge turned to the jury. Though it was a mere formality, everyone knew the outcome. "Gentlemen of the jury," he intoned, "you have heard the testimony. The law in this matter is clear. Sodomy is a crime of the highest order, an abomination that threatens the moral fabric of our community. Your task is to determine guilt." The jury was out for less than 10 minutes. It was just long enough to appear deliberate. When they returned, the foreman, a stern-faced cotton merchant, stood and delivered the verdict in a flat, emotionless voice. "On the charge of sodomy, we find the defendant, Edmund Hargrove, guilty." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom, not of surprise, but of grim satisfaction. The beast had been named. He continued, his voice dropping slightly, as if this part were a necessary, but less important piece of business. "We find the slaves, Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel, guilty of sodomy and of corrupting their master." This second verdict was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It placed the blame not on the man with all the power, but on the men with none. It restored the broken hierarchy. The master had been weak, but the slaves had been wicked. Their fate had been sealed from the moment Catherine screamed. Now it was official. The judge nodded grimly. "The court accepts the verdict. We shall now proceed to sentencing." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the courtroom, letting the tension build until it was a living thing in the room. Every person leaned forward, hungry for the conclusion. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. This was the reason they had crammed into this hot, suffocating room. They wanted to hear the specifics of the destruction they were about to witness. "Edmund Hargrove," the judge began, his voice booming, "you have been found guilty of a crime so foul it stains the very air we breathe. The law permits me to sentence you to death. However, I believe death would be an act of mercy you have not earned. You have violated the sacred trust of your position. You have brought shame upon your family, your name, and your community. You have corrupted those placed in your charge. Therefore, your punishment must be a living one." Edmund closed his eyes, his body swaying slightly. He was a dead man listening to the details of his own funeral. The judge leaned forward, his voice dropping, forcing everyone to strain to hear. "I sentence you to 3 days of public punishment in the town square. You will be locked in the pillory from dawn to dusk. At noon each day, you will receive 20 lashes from the whip, so that your sin may be scoured from your flesh, and the marks of it carried upon your body for the rest of your mortal life. And on the final day, you will bear witness to the execution of the 3 men whose souls you have damned along with your own." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was more than anyone had expected. 3 days, 60 lashes, and the forced witnessing of the hangings. It was a sentence of almost unimaginable cruelty. It was a work of art. A's for Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. The judge continued, turning his cold gaze to the corner where the 3 men stood. "You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging. The execution will take place in the town square on the afternoon of the 3rd day of Mr. Hargrove's punishment, so that he and all of Beaufort may witness the final consequences of this vile corruption." At the word, hanging, Daniel's legs gave out. He collapsed, a heap of terror on the floor. The deputies hauled him back to his feet, holding him upright. Samuel's face remained a stone mask, but his hands, clenched at his sides, were white, knuckled fists. But Marcus did something no one expected. He lifted his head and looked directly at Edmund. For the first time since this nightmare began, their eyes met across the crowded courtroom, and the expression on Marcus's face was not fear or hatred or anger. It was something far more devastating. It was pity. The judge struck his gavel, the sharp crack echoing the breaking of 4 men's lives. This court is adjourned. The sentence will be carried out beginning tomorrow morning at dawn. May God have mercy on your souls. He said the words, but his tone made it clear he believed they were all beyond God's mercy now. The courtroom erupted into a buzzing hive of excited, horrified chatter. People pushed for the exits, eager to spread the news, to dissect every detail of the sentence. They were no longer just spectators. They were participants. They were about to become the audience for a 3-day festival of pain and degradation. And the morbid energy was intoxicating. Catherine left without a backward glance at the broken man who was still, for a few more hours, her husband. She had done it. She had gotten everything she wanted. The truth was out. Edmund was destroyed, and she would soon be free. She walked out into the bright afternoon sun, a woman reborn from the ashes of her old life, unaware or uncaring that the fire she had started would burn everything, including a piece of her own soul, to cinders. You are not just watching this, you are becoming part of it. You are a witness now, just like them. The morning of the first day broke clear and hot, a beautiful day for a monstrous event. The sun rose over Beaufort, casting a golden, sanctifying light on the town square, but the square was already transformed. In its center stood the pillory, a crude wooden frame with holes for a man's head and hands, and beside it, the whipping post. Both looked freshly oiled, gleaming in the morning light, prepared for their starring role. A crowd had already gathered. It was a strange, festive atmosphere. Prominent citizens had set up chairs in the shade. Families stood in groups talking in low, excited voices. It was a spectacle, and no one wanted to miss it. At dawn, they brought Edmund from the jail. He was stripped to the waist, his hands bound. The man who had once been the master of Willowbrook now looked like any other condemned criminal. He stumbled, his feet bare on the rough ground. They led him to the pillory and locked him in. His head and hands were secured, his body bent forward in a permanent posture of submission. He was completely immobilized, utterly helpless. The sun began its slow, merciless climb. Within an hour, sweat was pouring down his face and back. Within 2, the flies had found him, crawling on his skin, in his eyes, his mouth. He could not brush them away. Within 3, his legs were shaking uncontrollably from the strain of his unnatural position. And the people watched. Some jeered, calling out the nature of his crime, their voices dripping with contempt. Others just stared, their faces blank, their eyes taking in every detail of his degradation. A few perhaps felt a flicker of pity, but they kept it hidden. To show sympathy for a man like Edmund would be to invite suspicion upon yourself. Catherine arrived mid-morning. She was accompanied by 2 female cousins who had traveled from Charleston to offer their support. She stood at a respectable distance, shaded by a black parasol, a stoic figure of wronged womanhood. She did not get too close, but she made sure she was visible. She wanted him to see her. She wanted him to know that she was there, watching and curating his suffering, ensuring it was performed to her exact specifications. At the edge of the square, chained together and flanked by guards, stood Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. They had been brought from the jail, forced to watch. This was part of Catherine's design. Their presence was a constant living reminder of Edmund's sin. They were the evidence, and their punishment was to witness his. At high noon, the church bells rang, signaling the hour. A hush fell over the crowd. The real performance was about to begin. Sheriff Dunwee strode to the center of the square, coiling a long, thick leather whip in his hand. He stood behind the pillory, his shadow falling over Edmund's exposed back. "Edmund Hargrove," he announced, his voice carrying over the silent square. You have been sentenced by a jury of your peers to receive 20 lashes for your abominable crimes. May this punishment serve as a warning to any other who would stray from the path of God and decency." Edmund's body went rigid. He braced himself, every muscle tensed for the impact. He had been whipped as a boy, a few light strokes for some minor transgression. This would be different. This was not a correction. This was an unmaking. The first lash cracked through the air like a gunshot. The leather bit into the flesh of Edmund's right shoulder, leaving an immediate angry, red welt. He gasped, a sharp intake of breath, but made no other sound. A thin line of blood beaded on the surface of his skin. The second lash followed, then the third, landing just below the first. By the fifth lash, his back was a crisscross of bleeding lines. A low groan escaped his lips. By the 10th, he was openly crying out with each blow, his body jerking violently in the stocks. By the 15th, he was sobbing, incoherent pleas for mercy mixing with shrieks of pure agony. The skin on his back was shredded, blood running in rivulets down his spine, soaking into the waistband of his trousers. The 20th and final lash fell. Edmund sagged in the pillory, held up only by the wooden frame. He was a wreck of a man, shuddering and whimpering. The crowd was silent now, the initial thrill of the spectacle replaced by the grim, uncomfortable reality of what they had just witnessed. They had watched a man be systematically broken, and their participation, their very presence, made them complicit. Sheriff Dunwee stepped back, his work for the day done. Edmund was left there in the stocks until sunset. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his world reduced to a blur of pain, flies, and the merciless sun. When they finally released him after dusk, he collapsed. The deputies had to drag his limp body back to the jail, where a doctor was waiting. The doctor's orders were not to heal him, but simply to keep him alive. He still had 2 more days of this hell to endure. A quote from a physician's journal of the time reads, "The skin is the organ that separates the self from the world. To flay it is to destroy the boundary of a man's soul, leaving him open to all the world's torments." Day 2 began just as the first had. They dragged Edmund from his cell at dawn, his back a raw, scabbed, over canvas of the previous day's torture. Every movement was agony, the rough cloth of his shirt sticking to the wounds, ripping them open again. They locked him back in the pillory, forcing him into the same posture of submission. The sun rose, finding the same target. The flies returned, drawn to the smell of blood and sweat. The crowd gathered again, smaller this time, the novelty having worn off for some. But the most zealous spectators were still there. Catherine returned, taking up her same position, the perfect grieving widow, a statue carved from ice and vengeance. Whispers had started to circulate about her. Some called her cruel, vindictive, unnatural in her coldness. But even those who whispered understood on a primal level why she was doing it. He had not just betrayed her. He had nullified her. He had revealed her entire life to be a sham. And this public deconstruction of him was the only way she could rebuild herself. At noon, the bells rang again. Sheriff Dunwee approached, the whip in his hand. This time, Edmund started screaming before the first lash even fell. There was no pretense of stoicism left, no pride. He was a cornered animal, and all he had left was the ability to feel pain and express it. He screamed. He begged. He pleaded with the sheriff, with the crowd, with God. He called out Catherine's name, his voice a raw, broken thing. "Catherine, mercy, please." She stood under her parasol, her face a serene, unmoving mask. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She just watched. 20 more lashes. They fell on the already brutalized flesh of his back, turning the landscape of scabs and welts into a uniform sheet of raw, bleeding meat. When it was over, he hung in the pillory, silent, his body twitching with spasms of pain. The doctor who examined him that night would later write in his private journal that he had never seen a man endure such a flogging and survive. But Edmund did survive. He was being kept alive by the sheer unyielding force of his wife's hatred. Death would have been a release, and Catherine was not in the business of offering release. She was crafting an eternity of suffering, and she was only on the second day. Day 3, the final day. When they brought Edmund to the square, he was barely conscious. His back was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. His face was swollen and blistered from the sun, his lips cracked and bleeding. He could no longer stand on his own. The deputies had to carry him to the pillory and hoist him into place. But the sentence was the sentence. The law had to be fulfilled. The crowd that day was the largest yet. Word had spread. People had come from neighboring counties, drawn by the promise of the grand finale. This was not just another whipping. Today, there would be a hanging. The town square was so packed that the deputies had to form a line to keep the spectators from pressing too close. Overnight, a gallows had been erected, a simple, stark wooden platform with a heavy crossbeam from which hung 3 nooses, swaying gently in the morning breeze. It had been positioned with chilling precision. From his place in the pillory, Edmund had a perfect, unobstructed view. This was Catherine's masterstroke, the final turn of the screw. He would not just know that he had caused their deaths. He would be forced to watch them happen, helpless, broken, and utterly implicated. At noon, the final 20 lashes came. Edmund barely made a sound this time. He was beyond screaming. His body jerked with each impact, a purely reflexive response. But his mind seemed to be somewhere else, in a place where pain was the only reality. When it was over, he hung limply, a ruined piece of humanity. The doctor was there, forcing water between his lips, ensuring he remained conscious. He had to be awake for what came next. At 200, the procession began. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were led from the jail, their chains clanking a grim rhythm on the cobblestones. The crowd fell silent as they walked through the parting sea of faces and climbed the 13 steps to the gallows platform. A minister stood waiting with a Bible, ready to offer them final prayers. But Daniel, the quiet one, the one who had trembled and wept, found his voice. "Save your prayers, Reverend," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "We don't need the prayers of a God who allows this. If your God sees this and does nothing, then he is no God of mine." The minister recoiled, shocked. Samuel spoke next, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd, his voice full of a cold, hard truth. "You call us criminals, but we had no choice. That is what it means to be a slave. We did what we had to do to survive. And now you kill us to protect your order. Remember that. When you go home to your families tonight, remember what you watched here today. Remember what you are." Marcus said nothing at all. He just looked at Edmund. Their eyes met one last time across the 20 feet of charged air that separated them. In that look, 1,000 unspeakable things were communicated. A shared history, a terrible intimacy, and a final tragic goodbye. The executioner, a burly man who did this work for the county, placed the rough hemp nooses around each man's neck. He adjusted them with a practiced, impersonal efficiency. Then he stepped back, waiting for the signal. Judge Middleton stood at the base of the gallows, a pocket watch in his hand. He was the master of ceremonies, the final arbiter of this ritual. He glanced at the watch. The sun beat down. The crowd held its breath. Edmund in the pillory lifted his head, his eyes wide with a horror that transcended his own physical pain. The judge snapped the watch shut and gave a sharp, definitive nod. The executioner pulled the lever. The trapdoors sprang open. 3 bodies dropped. There was a series of sickening sharp cracks that echoed across the silent square. The ropes went taut, and the necks of Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel snapped instantly. It was a quick death. That at least was the only mercy they were shown. Their bodies swung in the hot afternoon air, limp and lifeless, a gruesome pendulum marking the end of their stolen lives. And Edmund watched. He watched Marcus die. He watched Samuel die. He watched Daniel die. And in that moment, something inside his soul, something that had survived the humiliation and the floggings, finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. A sound came out of his mouth. It was not a scream. It was a low, guttural, wailing cry, the sound of an animal caught in a trap. A sound of such profound, bottomless guilt and despair that it would haunt the dreams of everyone who heard it for the rest of their lives. It was the sound of a man's soul being ripped out of his body. The crowd stood in stunned silence, their bloodlust finally sated, replaced by a cold, queasy feeling. They had gotten what they came for. They had witnessed the restoration of order. But the sound of Edmund's cry lingered in the air, a testament to the terrible price of their righteousness. The spectacle was over. The lesson had been taught. The bodies were left to hang for an hour, a final stark warning to anyone who dared to challenge the established order. Then they were cut down, loaded unceremoniously into a wagon, and taken to be buried in unmarked graves at the edge of town, a piece of land reserved for criminals and the unclaimed dead. At sunset, the sheriff returned and unlocked the pillory. Edmund collapsed to the ground, a heap of broken bones and shattered spirit. He had to be carried back to his cell. That evening, Judge Middleton visited him. He looked down at the bandaged, barely conscious man lying on the cot. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you have served your sentence. You are free to go, but understand this. You are no longer welcome in Beaufort. You are no longer welcome in South Carolina. If you attempt to reclaim your property or your position, you will find every door closed to you. My advice is to disappear. Go west. Pray that no one ever learns your name." Edmund said nothing. There was nothing to say. His life was over. He was a ghost, and his only purpose now was to haunt himself. 3 days later, when he had recovered just enough to walk, he left Beaufort. He took nothing with him but the clothes on his back and the permanent, hideous map of scars that crisscrossed his skin. Willowbrook and all its assets, including its people, were sold at auction. Families were broken up and scattered across the state. Marcus's wife, Rachel, was sold to a plantation in Georgia. She was never heard from again. The grand mansion was purchased by a new family who renamed it, desperate to erase the stain of the Harrove scandal. Edmund Hargrove vanished from the face of the earth. Rumors followed in his wake that he died in a Texas gutter, that he found his way to the California gold rush and lost himself in the anonymity of the frontier. But no one ever knew for sure. He simply ceased to exist, as thoroughly and completely as if he had been hanged alongside the men he was forced to watch die. Catherine returned to Charleston, as she had planned. She resumed her maiden name, Piton, and for the rest of her long life, she told everyone that her husband had died tragically of a fever. In a way, it was the truth. The man she had married was well and truly dead. Her family, the Charleston elite, welcomed her back into the fold. They saw her as a tragic heroine, an innocent victim of a monstrous deception, a woman who had endured an unspeakable ordeal with courage and dignity. They protected her, celebrated her resilience. She never remarried. She lived out her days in quiet respectability, managing her inheritance, attending church, the very model of a pious widow. But those who knew her well said they saw a change in her. A permanent winter had settled in her eyes, a hardness that had not been there before. She had orchestrated the complete and total annihilation of a man, and in the process, a part of her own humanity had been incinerated. The story of Willowbrook became a local legend, a ghost story whispered by parents to frighten their children into behaving. The official documents remained sealed, as the judge had ordered, to protect the reputations of all involved. The town of Beaufort moved on, burying the memory under layers of polite, civilized denial. Then in 1897, more than 50 years later, a young historian named Thomas Bradford, researching his doctoral thesis, petitioned the court for access to the sealed records. The request was granted. The judge, a new man from a new generation, decided that enough time had passed. History, he reasoned, deserved the truth. Bradford spent 3 months in the dusty courthouse archives, piecing together the story from trial transcripts, eyewitness accounts, the doctor's private notes, and Catherine's own chillingly precise testimony. He was horrified, not just by the brutality of the punishment, but by the cold, legalistic machinery that made it possible. He saw a society so terrified of what it could not control that it had to destroy it in the most public and spectacular way possible. He published his findings in a small academic journal in 1899. The article was mostly ignored. The story was too ugly, too complex, and it flew in the face of the romantic, sanitized myths of the Old South that were popular at the time. People did not want this version of their history. They wanted moonlight and magnolia, not pillories and public floggings. Finally, in 1923, 80 years after the fact, Beaufort County unsealed the records for good. A local newspaper ran a small article about the Harrove case, treating it as a bizarre historical curiosity from a more primitive time. The article noted that Catherine Pton had lived to the age of 87, dying peacefully in her Charleston home in 1902. It noted that the ultimate fate of Edmund Hargrove was still unknown. And it noted that descendants of the families of Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel still lived in the area, though most had no idea about the true, horrifying story of how their ancestors had died. The article concluded with a sentence of breathtaking complacency. It was a different time with different standards of morality. We can only be grateful that we live in a more enlightened age. But are we? Is it really so different? The laws have changed, yes. The pillory and the whipping post are gone, but the underlying mechanics of human nature, have they changed at all? The capacity for cruelty in the name of order, the need to create scapegoats to absorb a community's fears, the way we turn human beings into symbols and then destroy them to make a point, the terrifying speed with which a crowd can be whipped into a righteous mob hungry for a sacrifice. Has any of that really gone away, or does it just wear a different mask? Now, this story is disturbing not because it is ancient, but because it is familiar. It reveals an uncomfortable truth about the darkness that lies coiled just beneath the surface of civilization, waiting for the right excuse, the right moment of fear, to strike. Edmund, Catherine, Marcus, Samuel, Daniel, they are all long dead. Their world has vanished, but the questions they leave behind still echo in the silence. The choices they made, the violence they endured, the hatred they unleashed, it all remains a permanent stain on the pages of a history we would rather forget.